Welcome to the Bringing Hope Home podcast. We're Bryce and Colette Schaefer, pastors, teachers, and madly in love empty nesters. We invite you into our home as we candidly share faith-filled, practical ways to build a strong and lasting marriage.
And welcome to another episode of Bringing Hope Home. We're Bryce and Colette Schaefer, and today we are talking about the naked truth.
Yeah, I think you're trying to be punny on this one. That's what I'm thinking. So, yeah, the naked truth is what we're going to dive into
today. We're
getting
naked? What?
Well, yeah, we're not stripping down as in stripping our clothes off this time. We're going to just talk about this time. Well, sometimes we talk about sex, but this time we're talking about vulnerability. Mm-hmm. So the naked truth is a little bit different. But if you know the context, it makes sense.
Yeah, you feel just as vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, you feel like you're out there and, everything's bare to the world, and you don't want that. But you know what, with your spouse, you pick that person so you could be vulnerable with them. Mm-hmm. That's really one of the great benefits of being married, is you can let your faults, let your insecurities not be picked apart, but be edified. You can edify in that. You can help them overcome those. There's lots of different things that your spouse is there for. And but still, in marriages, we see time and time again where people feel like they need to stay closed off and shut out even their spouse from their true feelings and situations.
Yeah, that's never turns out good.
No, it never does. So we want to have, vulnerability with our spouse at the right time in the right situations. Be, another way of saying it is be transparent. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's key in a marriage, I think. I think society says if you're vulnerable, you're weak. Somebody will take advantage of you, and they might be right in the world. But again, we're talking about in a home, in a covenant relationship, when we are to be about each other winning, about helping each other, and really making sure we cover each other's backs. Being vulnerable or transparent is one of the biggest blessings.
And it just makes your marriage stronger, right? I mean, it goes back to being emotionally intimate. That's really what we're talking about here, is emotional intimacy. And that's where a lot of people have a hard time with, being emotional intimate, because, maybe we've been made fun of for our views or whatever. And so we're guarded. We have a fear of being rejected, especially when we open up our heart. So I think this area is actually a little harder to bear all than even being physically intimate right. In some regards, because it's bearing who you really are, your soul, your emotions, your whys, your you.
Yeah. So you're telling me it takes a lot of courage.
It does. It takes a lot of courage to open up and to let somebody into those secret places that you don't typically let a lot of people into. And maybe you haven't even explored some of those spots yourself. A lot of times we just put up walls. We've been hurt or whatever, so we just build those walls, and we don't want to go there ourselves, and we don't want to let anybody else in. As Christians, a lot of times we don't want to let God into those areas. Right. It's like, nope, you can deal with this and this, but God, don't come into this messy room, of our soul. And so we do that with our spouse.
Yeah,
as well.
Unfortunately. And the one thing we don't want you to ever do is avoid things. We don't want to avoid things. So you don't want to avoid. And that's sometimes when you don't open up, you can kind of be that one that has the ostrich head in the sand. If I don't see it, don't hear it, it's not there. But it typically doesn't go away, and things usually grow bigger and louder if we don't, at least face them and figure those things out. Mm-hmm. You look at David and Goliath. Goliath was not going to go away, and he got more forceful and more boisterous every day that the Israelite army didn't challenge him. And again, it was fear that was set in the hearts of the Israelites that stopped them from moving forward. But what got David all riled up and fired up about is the covenant relationship. And he said the covenant is bigger than the fear. His covenant is bigger than the problem. And because of that, me and my God, we can take care of this. And that should be the same mentality we have in a marriage. Now, again, you both have to come at it with this mindset to do that. And again, you don't want to avoid things, and you don't want to be there domineering. And the other person, don't take it as ammunition or a weapon to be used later. This is about helping each other and helping that one in particular that's being vulnerable at the moment. And then that's the way of helping that person take baby steps if need be to figure it out and to find victory. And that's what we want with our spouses, is to find victory. If not, if we're both covering things up, I always feel like then that's learned helplessness, that's coping. And that's good for a while and okay for certain situations for a time, but that never does the whole situation good when you're done. So I thought of this question. I said, Pastor, what if me trying to deal with something makes things worse? That I've heard that before. But I think of our Marriage Builders course, and one of the things we kind of tried to get excited about in that course is demolition day. Yeah. And sometimes you do have to break a few eggs to make an omelet, and so it might get a little worse. You might feel more vulnerable, which leads to other things. But if you approach it in the right way, in love, pray about it, both of you before.
Pray about it and ask the Holy Spirit to help you. If it is a difficult situation or a difficult issue in your life, pray that God would give you the right words and way to approach it with your
And again,
spouse.
it's all about dealing with your fear, like you said earlier. And so asking God, how do I overcome that? And as we know, he said to Joshua, and he says to all of us, be strong and courageous. And then what does he say? Go look into the word and don't look to the right or to the left, but stay courageous in that word and what I tell you to meditate on, and that usually will help you figure things out and a lot quicker than you think, I believe.
Yeah.
So, a couple different things that I've thought of if you're not vulnerable in marriage, it leads to loneliness and feeling isolated. I know too many, it could be men or women, but you feel isolated and lonely.
And they've done it to themselves, building blocks, building a wall around yourself. You wonder why you feel isolated. Well, maybe knock down some of those walls and let somebody in.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And, as the spouse, if you realize that your spouse has issues, has walls up, be very empathetic. And you might not understand why the issue is a big deal to your spouse, but approach it. If it's tough for them, then acknowledge that. Give them room to explore and to express what they're feeling, even if you think it's dumb. If you think, don't ever say, well, that's dumb. Why would you feel that? No, we're going to empathize. We're going to be a safe place for, your spouse to open up to. Otherwise, they're not going to want to, open up.
Right. And what happens when you don't want to open up to your spouse? Then it becomes stagnant and there's a disconnect that starts to form, and a separation that happens emotionally and spiritually and then physically.
Now, there's always time, right?
Right.
The right timing for conversations like this. It's usually not in a heated, disagreement, fight.
Right.
That's not when you should probably
Or when you're at somebody else's house and something happens.
To bring up something.
Yeah,
That's
awkward. So, yeah, and not to do it, it's just not good. So, I think we'll start with some tips on how to be vulnerable or deal with some vulnerable situations or issues. And the first thing is to just know yourself. First of all, explore yourself. Talk to God and ask Him some questions about you. I think that's so important because you need to know and figure out your feelings. And sometimes you say, I don't know. Well, again, you don't know, but God does. So let Him say, God, I can't figure this out, but you can. Help me sift through this and why I'm feeling this high anxiety or feeling so isolated or whatever the case may be. Know yourself first. Because it's hard if you're going to go talk to your spouse about it and you really don't know how to pinpoint it, guess what? I can guarantee they're not going to know how to pinpoint it either. And that's where a lot of guys get frustrated with their wives, that they're like, well, what do you want me to do about it? You're telling me all this stuff, but there's nothing to aim at to pinpoint down to help figure it out or whatever.
Sometimes it's just listening.
Okay. Sometimes it's just listening. I get that.
A lot of the times it's just listening. It's not fixing.
Right. But
you guys want to fix.
Oh, we do want to fix. But you know what I'm saying? I just think you got to know yourself first before you go into any situation. It's just like a good teacher knows the subject before they start teaching. They don't just, I'll learn it as I go. So, and sometimes it has to happen that way. I get that. I've been there even as a teacher. Well, we're going to learn this together, kids. But then I start out that way. So anyway, that's a good one. And then the next one starts slow. If it's a vulnerable issue to you, go slow. You don't have to unload all at one sitting. Mm-hmm. It might be too much for the other to handle.
If there's a situation, that is touchy for you or something, you could just say, hey, I'm having this, whatever it is, brings up some emotions and I'm not even sure what all those are, but I'm just letting you know, that's there. I'm feeling uncomfortable or whatever the situation may be. And then when you sift through, maybe you could come back and finish, that conversation, or your spouse can help you through that.
Mm-hmm. I just think, take it one step at a time, one day at a time. It's okay that you don't finish a race all in 1 second, or you don't climb a mountain all in one step. It takes multiple steps. Mm-hmm. And so know that it might need to, have some slow down times. It doesn't all have to be at once. And even though we all like things instantly. Mm-hmm. The next thing is, set time aside in your week with your spouse just to talk, to dream, to plan, and in those moments, it's not like you're writing your list of, okay, I got to be vulnerable here. Right. But it allows you allow the conversation to evolve mm-hmm. in that moment and breathe. And a lot of times you're going to find that God prompts and pushes your conversations in a situation that He knows is right to be dealt with that moment.
Right. It's not like you have to approach this as, okay, we're going to be emotionally connected right now. No, it's just
don't go to that extreme.
Yeah. What it is I'm going to set aside, my husband's important. This time right now is just us. Right now we're empty nested, so dinner time we can sit and we can just, a lot of time we can just sit and talk.
A little bit different.
Our days and schedules are a lot different. But at the table we can sit and talk about whatever, or
we use the table a lot.
We do use the table a lot.
Because it is a very perfect place.
And we linger, and talk. And not saying every time you have to have an in-depth conversation. Right. There's plenty of times when we sit there and don't say anything at all. Mm-hmm. And some people might say, well, that's kind of awkward. Well, not when you feel safe and feel at peace. Maybe it's what you need is just to sit together. Mm-hmm. And that's okay too. That actually takes a lot of vulnerability just to sit in silence and be okay. Nothing is wrong. Nothing is, needs to be said. It's just being comfortable with each other and in each other's presence. And it just kind of flows. Sometimes you have a lot of conversations. Sometimes
right.
It's a little...
Yeah, it's okay to have that no talking time. And I think on a walk is a great place. I always find too, out on the golf course is an easy one.
Doing something.
Because you're doing a little something, but you don't have to be that engaged. Fishing is another great one. I know spouses that both spouses don't fish, or both of them fish, but just being there together out on the water, enjoying time together, those are the moments that you are just organic, and you let those vulnerable moments happen when God prompts them. So that's
we
important.
Do have those conversation starters. That's part of our marriage builders course. It's a bonus there. But if you're stuck with conversation starters or what to talk about, you can come up with some ideas
for sure.
there.
And then the last couple things is just figure out needs versus wants. I think sometimes we get too, caught up in our wants, trying to make them needs. And I really do. Like I want or I need to have a cappuccino. Well, really, do we need one? No, we want one. And I think sometimes with some issues in our lives, sometimes we perceive them as needs and our spouse perceives them as wants. And that's where I got to hesitate here. Well, again, let's talk about this needs versus wants and the value of things in our marriage, in our relationship, and then go from there. And then always remember to bring more positive than you do negative, especially if you're the hearer. Bring some positive. I hear you saying, and this is good, or you're really good in this regard. Be positive.
Yep. And when you're having, conversations together, you can reword something. If there's something that your spouse is doing that's bothering you or whatever, you can reword it to where it's like, honey, I see that this is taking away from your life, or this is really consuming you. And I hate that I see that you're stressed. Instead of coming at the situation going, man, you're just so irritated, you shouldn't even...
Yeah, boy, you're on edge.
Yeah. Coming at it as a more empathetic, and saying, I love you, and I see this might be a place in your life. I want you to be better. I want better for you. So...
that opens up the door real nicely.
Right. So, and that's a good thing to do, like on a walk, and
So that's good. And so these are just some things to think about when we're trying to be vulnerable with our spouse, because we know we can put up walls pretty fast.
And it just takes your conversations to the next level. That's what you really want, to take your conversations from just, hi, how was your day? The business of life, to the more intimate details of yourselves and your relationship. So
for sure.
All right.
Well, we're excited that you and your spouse or you and your significant other can sit down and have some greater conversations from what we talked about today. And like we always say, and what we're believing for is that you bring hope home to your life today.
If you're listening on the Apple Podcast app, give us a 5-star rating and drop a review. If you're listening on Spotify, give us a follow. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. See you next week.